We got a lot of friends here in Atlanta that have seen Debbie's Peppermills and some of her work, and they would like to have one. So we're going to make a few. Whether she's going to turn it in or I'm going to turn it, I'm not really sure yet. But either way, the first step is to get a blank put together and glued up. You can see that we like this twisted design that we call it, because from certain angles it does look like the wood is twisted together. The reality is that the wood is a glued up laminate of different pieces of wood, and then we cut it on the bias. And I'll show you how I do that a little later in the video. But the first step was to talk to our friends that had got their order in first, Angie and Curtis. And Angie and Curtis had asked for something made out of light wood. The wood in their kitchen is mostly light, and so they'd like something made out of light wood. Went to the shorts pile, and I got a couple pieces of maple that came out of there, about 3/8 of an inch thick, which will work really nice. I have a piece that's 3/4 of an inch thick. I have this 8/4 piece, 2 inches thick, that was left over from the table that we did in an earlier video. And I need a contrasting wood. Now, for contrasting wood, I could use something dark, would look very nice. Bocote or a piece of Honduras rosewood would also look very nice with the maple. But to try to keep it light, because that's what the customer asked for, I think I'm going to use cherry with this. So it'll give me enough of a contrast to be able to see the piece, and I think they'll look good together. So, going to spend some time on the table saw, the joiner, the planer, to get all of these pieces to the right dimension, the right size, and then we'll go ahead and get them glued up. Once they're glued and dried overnight, then we'll go ahead and show you how we cut this on the bias and get it ready to go to the lathe. Okay, so the next step is going to be to glue up the blank that we're going to use to turn our Peppermill. As we said before, we're going to use cherry and maple. I've got the board's thickness to the right width, cut to approximately the length I need. They're about 15 inches. I need 14. We'll true that up after the glue dries. So we're going to go ahead and glue that up now. One last quick look. I pull all those together just to make sure that I don't see any gaps that I don't think I can compensate for with the clamps. And I think that looks really good. I've got witness marks on here to make sure that I get them back in the right order. And as we glue this up, we're going to use, back to the polyurethane glue, we're going to use Gorilla Glue. I like the polyurethane glue on anything that I'm going to spin up on the lathe. Now, if I'm doing a segmented turning, I will use white glue or yellow glue, but for the most part, if I'm going to spin something up on the lathe and I'm going to put a tool to it and have the risk of it coming apart on me, I'm going to use polyurethane glue. I think it's the best glue for that application. Got an extra bottle because there's not a lot left in this one. I'll speed this up so you can see what it looks like, but we'll just go through and glue it up. So here is the rough blank that we glued up earlier that's going to be used to make the Peppermill. It's going to be one of our twisted designs. So we're going to square this up, get it planed off through the table saw and get it so we have some nice square edges. And then I'll show you how I cut it on the bias to get that twisted look. So a little bit of work to do this first. Okay, so here's a blank for the Peppermill that we're going to be working on. If you remember, we glued this up the other day. It's a laminate of cherry and maple in varying widths, and I laminated it and glued it up with polyurethane glue so I get good expansion. A couple passes through the planer and the joiner, once over the table saw just to smooth everything up. Now we're going to lay it out. If I were to turn this as a straight blank, I would get a very nice Peppermill, but all the woods would be straight up and down. And we're really going for this twisted look that we have here. And the way we do that is we lay it out on the bias. Now, we found over the years that a 12-inch height Peppermill just happens to be the right size for most of the kits that we use. And we find that the ratio is best if the top is about 20% of the base. So we make the base exactly 10 inches, and we make the top of the Peppermill at about 10. So we need the blank to be at least 12. I usually try to go a little more than that. It gives me some room to be able to finish the top and do some stuff on it. But this is a good example of what a 12 by 2 3/4, which is the diameter we want to shoot for, 12 by 2 3/4 two-dimensional look would be. And if I put it on here straight, you see I got lots of wood. But we're going to angle this as much as we can. So we'll take it right out to the edge there and down at the bottom. And we're going to angle it. Then I'll actually run it out to the top a little bit. And then I'll cut this on the bandsaw, square it up, and that will give us a nice blank that we can then take to the lathe. I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. Okay, so now we're ready to start cutting this Peppermill. So I've already, as I said, run this through the table saw. The joiner got it nice and squared up the end. It's going to be the bottom. Leave the blank a little bit long. I made it about 16 inches, even though I only need a little over 12. And the reason for that is I can take an existing Peppermill and I can move it up and down on a blank and get an idea of where the wood's going to break and what the side of it's going to look like, so I can actually see that. Now on this particular one, it just worked out that I could have probably went with about 12 or 13 inches. I'm going to leave this piece flush at the bottom. So the very first step is going to be to take and measure 10 inches. That's the length of the body of the Peppermill. And I need to make sure I get the 10 inches. So I'm going to cut that right on that 10-inch mark. I'm going to try to leave the line when I do that. And I am going to cut it on the bandsaw. So here's our two pieces. Cut straight on the bandsaw, nice straight cut. They match together real well. And if you notice when I put them back together, these grain match, especially with these different color woods, they line up perfectly, and that's what we want. Next step is going to be to drill the holes for this. Different size holes for each, literally each end gets a different hole. Mating surfaces are going to get a 1-inch hole. Bottom gets an 1.5 inches with an inch recess. I'll show you what that looks like. Top gets a 1/4 inch hole. And if you mess those up, they'll never go back together right. So I always put witness marks on and try to make sure that I maintain the right registration when I drill these holes. The first step though is to find the exact center of every one of these blocks on both ends. And to do that, I have one of these fancy tools. You could just use a straight edge and draw corner to corner, and that would help you find the center. The only issue I have with that is sometimes these corners aren't really good and sharp, and if they aren't, you don't get exact center. And especially where these two mate together, using the process that I use, it's critical that you get this as close to center as you can. Good sharp pencil. You've seen these tools work the way they work, obviously. 4 lines, and the square on these tools actually offset just a little bit, and so it gives you not a perfect X, but a real zone in the middle that's very small, and you can actually take a scratch hole then and put it right in the center of that little rectangle that's drawn and get that hole started. I'll do 3 more and we'll come back and I'll show you what we're going to drill, how we're going to drill it. Okay, so here we are set up at the drill press. We've got both pieces that we're going to drill holes in. First hole we're going to drill, we're going to use a 40mm bit, about 1 9/16 inches. We're going to drill a 1/2 inch deep recess in the bottom. Very important that we're using the bottom. That's why those witness marks were so critical. In the bottom of the Peppermill, and we'll drill that first. I got the other bits that I'm going to need here. I've got a 1-inch Forster bit, and I've got one that's about 6 inches long. Help me get down through the middle of this when I'm ready to do that. And I've got a 1/4 inch bit that we'll use later. But those are the 4 bits that I need to be able to drill out this Peppermill. So let's make some wood chip. Okay, so we have our 2 pieces. We have the bottom piece of the Peppermill and what will become the top of the Peppermill. We've drilled holes in both ends of the bottom. The first hole was a 40mm hole. It's a 1/2 inch deep. It's a bit of a recess, and then I went ahead and took a 1-inch bit and I went another inch, or about a 1/2 inch deep on that. And I'll show you why I do that when we go over to the lathe, but that's where the drive spur is going to sit in the bottom of this, and I want them to have a good contact point, so I only drill that hole about a 1/2 inch deep. However, on the other end, I can take that down now while the blank is square and easy to hold as deep as I can. So I ran my 6-inch, 1-inch diameter bit as far into here as I can. Later, after the blank is turned, I'll go ahead and finish drilling out this hole. I've got another 2 inches to go. It's relatively easy to hold it after it's turned, but I'll do as much as I possibly can when the blanks are square. The last hole I drilled was a 1-inch diameter hole, approximately 1/2 inch deep in the bottom part of the top. So where these go together with the register lines, I now have two 1-inch holes, and if my center marks were right, those two 1-inch holes should align perfectly. And when I put a dowel in there, which will be our next step, I'll be able to make sure these rotate, and they should rotate on a perfect plane so that the sides line up. And if that happens, I know once I turn it, the top will always hold register as it turns against the bottom piece. So next step, let's get that dowel cut and glued into the top part of the blank. Okay, we have our two pieces of the Peppermill, the top and the bottom. Holes are drilled, tenons glued in with 5-minute epoxy. When I line those up and rotate them, they line back up perfectly on all 4 sides, so I know that both of those holes are in the middle and the tenon's in the middle. That's critically important because if it's offset at least a little bit when I turn it, then as I twist the top's going to move back and forth and register to the bottom, and it's never going to look right except when it's perfectly lined up in one orientation, and it doesn't always end up that way. So I find this is the best way to do it. But now in order to turn this, it's also easier for me to turn this as one blank, at least to get it round and to be able to move to the next step. And so normally I would use turner's tape. I don't have any turner's tape left, so I'm using a product called Duo Stick. It's a product that I've had good success with in the past, and so we're going to use that, and I'll just cover the entire top section of the bottom part of the Peppermill, the body of the Peppermill. And I'm going to take this and just make sure I get a really good seal and good adhesion to that. And I want to go ahead and turn this upside down, trim off the excess so that it's perfectly flush with the side. Find my registration marks, my witness marks. I tenon in the hole, line those up, get it where I want it. A couple nice taps with a hammer, and I am back to one piece. I am going to put this on the table saw. I'm going to go ahead and knock the corners of this off on a table saw first. Normally it's a solid piece of wood this size, don't worry with it, put it on the lathe and turn it, and it'd be fine. But because this is a two-piece, now a two-piece blank, and the only thing holding it together in the middle is that tape, I'm going to go ahead and knock those corners off, just to make it a little easier on the initial turning. So heading over to the lathe.